It is the World Service. You love that.
What's that?
And a copy of the Graceful Garland played it, and he played it. I thought played it on bananas. You love that one. That is World Service. My father,
I don't know what you're.
my father played him Amazing Grace.
Oh, Amazing Grace. Okay.
Yeah, I had his World Service back then, and the way with January 107. I couldn't move a little bit.
Okay. Because this might be in the way of seeing things so that I can videotape it.
Rarely said.
Well, we are recording right now, and we're not going to get started this second, but just letting you know that I'm recording these for so that we can put them on the app. So if someone misses one, they can come back to these things. So feel free to grab some coffee if you don't have any. No, you're right on time. Okay, now this is how St. Paul's times works. Okay, if I wanted you here at 9:15, I should have said 9 o'clock. Now I said 9:15, I have to at least expect that the 9:15 to 9:20 is going to be getting settled in. So as we get settled in, I do want to point out a couple of things. I want to say a big thank you on this project. Leanie Mitchell has been the artistic director for this project. She has been a huge help. She put together the PowerPoint for us, as well as getting everything, just the information together. And both she and I were studying on our own, and then we came together and I helped adjust a few things on the PowerPoint, but it's an excellent PowerPoint, and there was little to adjust. Just some quips and stories that came up, and looking at some things that we added. And Leonie and I are particularly fond of our vestry, right? It's the story that we're going to share with you in the 1920s. And so having to do with women's right to vote and women in, yeah, so it puts us in a bad and good light at the same time, right, Leanie? Wouldn't you say, historically? They figured it out fast. Yeah, they figured it out fast. So please, I don't know. Yeah, we can't wait to tell you a little bit of story. So I just want to say welcome to the first class. I'm going to be kind of going back and forth here. The video camera here that we have, I have to test a little bit of things here for the class because, as I said, we're recording today, and I have to make sure. Yep, I was right. I'm going to have to undo the screen and see if I can do this, because I'm going to. There we go. Hey, Joey, how are you?
Good morning.
Hey, sorry about Friday's game, Joey.
Oh, man.
How'd it go? He's one of the coaches on the Farmersville varsity team, so I just saw the score. I don't know really what happened.
Oh, that kid that we played from Morosi, he's like 87th in the nation in rushing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he leads Floyd County in rushing.
Okay.
He's had consecutive 2,000-yard seasons, and he's a senior this year, so.
Okay.
That's the Camarillo. Yeah.
Well, I said welcome and invited you to grab coffee still, Joe. You can go back around, grab coffee if you like, and there's some food. Just go ahead and do that. This is set up right here so that we can videotape this class. And the way that it's going to be set up is that the primary thing that they'll see is the slide. They won't see, but there's a little tiny picture in the video that has my face. So they'll see that a little bit, but they'll mostly see the slides. And so we wanted to begin today just to welcome you, and we're glad that you're here. And we're going to talk about where we are today in the life of the church, simply by sharing with you our mission statement. St. Paul's Anglican Church. where God builds things. 4 words, where God builds things. About 2 years ago, when we were gathering together in our leadership, we were asking ourselves the questions, what is it that makes us moving forward? What is it that's at the center of our hearts? And we said, God is doing amazing things and he's building things up in the life of the church. And so we said, the mission that God is giving us right now is it's where God builds things. And the idea is that as he is building a physical structure, he's also building up our lives. That's why we have the 4 pillars of the statement that God builds lives, families, communities, and hope. And so when we look at the history of our church, what we're going to see is we're going to see that this church has been about building God's kingdom in Visalia. Some decades are slower, less growth. Some are exponentially large. Anybody want to guess maybe 3 different significant times in the life of the church that exponential growth happened? Anybody want to think?
Well, I know as a Sunday school teacher, we are growing out of our room.
Right now, you're growing out of your room. That's fantastic.
Yes.
That's an excellent one. What's another one?
The beginning.
The 60s, yeah.
The very beginning, and then he said the 60s. Yeah, so the very beginning, the growth, actually, you're absolutely right, Joey. In the 1960s is a latter part of a huge significant growth. But as Leanie will tell you, the beginning was rough and slow going. And so it took about 20 years for things to really take off at St. Paul's. And so what we're going to talk about today is that the first 20 years, like the big exponential growth was 1995. I mean, 1895, 1945, right? And there was another significant, another taking off point has to be Father Cole's moving into Father James's ministry, okay, with the
James and Cole.
Father James moving with Father.
Yeah.
well, that's what I meant. Beginning Father Cole and then Father James comes out.
Yeah.
And then we have St. Barnabas. We have the expansion of the school, moving out to this facility. So we have all those things going on. And then we have a contraction. What's the big contraction that we have? Well, we have several, but the most recently is,
The recent.
yes, the recent unpleasantness, as many people call it. Yeah, that's what, everybody knows that. Not everybody is a reference to the Civil War. That's what it is. And so, but when I moved down to Florida, we talked about the Civil War. No. Because you mean the war of northern aggression. So we have actually some contraction and destabilizing in between 1895, and a little bit after that. And the most interesting part of that, which is not really a big part of our history, and that is the history of St. Paul's is longevity in pastorships. There was a 7-year period in which 7 people came through and nothing happened. In fact, there was a lot of struggle during that time. Can you guess it? We'll talk about it. So we're going to talk about that part today. We're going to talk about, so here's our next, here's where we're going to be going today. All right. We're going to be talking about the first 100 years. Wow, the first week is about the first 100 years. Yeah, we're going to talk about 1850 all the way through 1945. And then next week, we're going to get into 1945 to 1989. So can you guess why we might have that as a significant block? What happened in 1945? The war ended. You would think that that would be a significant marker, and it is, but this church does not mark that time period as post-war growth that most communities mark it as. What do they mark it as? Father Vic came.
Yeah.
1945, that's when Father Vic came. So it's a natural transition point after World War II. Father Vic's tenure begins, and then we go all the way to 1989. And so 1989 marks another turn. It's just a natural time for yes.
Jerry and Darlene got married in the church in 1989.
That's, you know what?
16, 1989.
We could only sustain the growth from that for so long. It lasted about 2010.
In the rain that day.
And it rained. So the 20 years there is a tribute to Jerry and Darlene and their mission to the church. Well, there's some significant points of interest there besides that, not as significant as that, but that's when this property was purchased in order to move the school from the campus over here. And also another significant 30-year tenure of Father James as well.
Yep.
Marks that particular point. So then we're going to go from there to 1990. From 1990 to present day. Now, we have 3 weeks and 35 minutes each week to talk about this. There's one section of history we're not going to be talking about that's important for people like my friend Ken here who wants to be confirmed. And that is the history of the Anglicanism beginning from Jesus all the way to 1850. So we're going to have another 35-minute class for the first 1800 years. With this class, it's going to be
King Henry.
yeah, King Henry VIII, who's the breaking away of the Anglican Church from Rome. We're gonna say, I usually use this with a kind of like in Civil War, because there's a Civil War historian right over here. Everyone will give you all these reasons why it wasn't about King Henry's wanting a divorce, and they'd be right. Economic realities, political realities, there's church structure, there's church politics, all these different things. But it was kind of about his divorce, wasn't it? Same thing with the Civil War. There's so many different realities that had to do with the Civil War that someone might come in and say, well, it really wasn't about slavery. It was about this, but Ed will say, nope, it was about slavery, wasn't it? Yeah, you always come back to that. So you can never say that wasn't a significant thing that happened. So it's always a part. So that's a whole different aspect, and it'd be great to talk about that. But we're talking about the history of St. Paul's today. So, and once again, if you weren't here at the beginning, this slideshow and a lot of the work going into this class was developed by Lady Mitchell. I'm very appreciative of that. She also made the goodies, so have some of those before we get started. So we're going to get started. Everyone has you're going to get a gift at the end of class. Okay, you're going to get this. This is a copy of this book. Now, what we need in the life, this is the history of St. Paul's all the way up to 1962. And so this is a copy of that. But what we don't have is a comprehensive history from 1962 to present. And that is a ministry that, let's pray that God puts that on someone's heart to write that, to be able to have that for our church. So you'll get this as a gift. And so this week, as you leave, you can take that. We'll also have them on the table. So let's get started today. We're going to be looking here about the history for our parish, and it'll be right here on your page. It's barely going to be able to read it, but you can write some notes on each of the particular, if you have a pen on that particular side. Now, we're going to look at the reality that it was in 1876 that the church actually sent its first missionaries into the Visalia Tulare area. And it wasn't until the St. Paul's was not a church in and of itself to begin with. It was part of a greater mission called the St. John's Mission. Now, the St. John's Mission, unlike churches of today, it was a geographic area, just like they had what was called, this was at that time, the Diocese of California. And so basically there was the Diocese of Southern California, and the Diocese of California was everything above the second half of California, the northern half. But then there began to have missionary districts right about the time that we're looking at the late 1800s, early 1900s. And you begin to have the missionary district of the Diocese of San Joaquin. And you begin to have missionary bishops coming up into our area, not just bishops from Northern California. And can you guess where those bishops were operating out of? San Francisco, that area, because that's where by 1850, it's important for us to know a little bit of the history that we have. This is this is just a quick overview, okay? So if we're looking here, 1876, we're going to learn that that's going to be the first activities or services that are actively ongoing, that are consistent. In 1887, we become a mission. Not a parish, but we were organized as an individual mission. And then the first actual church building is constructed in 1894. So that's another significant marker. 1911, the congregation moves to the corner of Center and Encina Avenue. And in 2021, the Reverend Louis Sanford, the first bishop of the Episcopal Missionary District, as I said, San Joaquin, declares the mission to be a parish. So first time we have services, first time we're organized as a mission, 1911, we become a parish. So those are important markers. 1949 is when the building on Hall Street is erected. And then in 2020, we began the process of building the new campus. So what you're going to see within the history, you're going to have two big significant jumping off points in this class. You're going to have people and structure to help give us a delineation of the history and the movement of our church. Any questions so far? All right, let's talk a little bit about the early history of our area. How many of you know much about the early history of the Central Valley? You both of you know.
Well, I taught third grade.
Third grade, and so third grade, and so
I know third grade.
where was it? Look, I mean, it's right up here. Where was it? So before the gold rush, right? Nobody was really settled in the Central Valley of California for two reasons. In the summer, it was hot, and in the winter, it's foggy, right? And so the environment wasn't hospitable for inward settlements. But who was in the Central Valley during that time? Native Americans. What settlers also? But Native Americans, and who was settling in the part? Ranchers, cattlemen. And so the only thing that was really happening on the inward parts here before 1850 were the cattle ranchers. So what happens in what year is the gold rush? 1849. Okay, so in 1849, Columbia, in the northern part of the Central Valley, begins to be settled. And the interesting part about that gold rush is that much of what's being found can be actually quarried by individuals with individual mines, right? So that you can get gold nuggets, things like that. Think about the discovery of oil in Texas and these places where oil derricks can go up and you can get the oil out of the ground. Well, in 1850, John Woods, after this happens, John Woods is the first Episcopal missionary that enters into the valley. Actually, not the Episcopal missionary. He enters into the valley, the South Valley, and he starts settlements, not only up in the northern part of the Central Valley, below Sacramento, the Sacramento area, but you start getting all of this down here. What are they doing down here? Searching for gold. It's finally found in 1851 is when Visalia is found. Now, here's an interesting thing about it was founded by two brothers by the last name of Vice. And so you have to connect Vice and Alia, which is settlement or town, or so Visalia.
There's also a town in Kentucky.
Yes.
It's not really a town. I've looked it up. But it's called Visalia,
Yeah.
Kentucky. And the Vice brothers came from there. Did you?
Now, in 1853, we have someone important in the missionary life of the Central Valley, gets consecrated Bishop of California. His name's William Kipp. And in 1855, he travels Los Angeles and he goes up to so I guess the Diocese of California, I'm sorry if it's the whole state. And so he comes up from Los Angeles and looks at everything having to do with the Central Valley. And this is what he calls it. Central Valley is one unbroken, scorched, and yellow waste. So, is there gonna be a whole lot of missionary efforts in the 1850s? No, but in 1855, something else happens in the South Valley. Gold is discovered on the Kern River up in the mountains.
Yeah.
But it isn't like the gold up north, and it isn't like the oil derricks in Texas. It's more like fracking. You cannot go in and get the gold there simply by having individuals going and making claims, using pickaxe, digging it out. So what happens is that companies come in and begin to mine the gold. You have to have a lot of infrastructure and investment to be able to get this particular gold. So you're gonna see also that the South Valley does not get developed in the same way as the northern half of the Central Valley. So looking in the 1850s, you're still seeing smaller settlements. Can you pull a chair behind you right up here for Larry? He's coming on in.
Oh, okay. Here, okay.
All right, so what do we think, Leanie? Did we cover this 5 years and enough, or is it too long? I gave it too much, or? All right, because Leanie's job is to, after this, is to critique and help us make sure we make good time next week. Now, as we said, I already did the first part. So basically, the San Joaquin Valley, when it says remains from 1855 remains unoccupied by the church, do you think it means the wider church or the Episcopal church? The Episcopal church.
Catholic were here.
Catholics were here a long time ago. Now, I was just talking to Pastor John this morning, and we were talking, he was sharing with me a quote on missions from the recently deceased Bishop of Albany. His name's Dan Herzog. And I think he was quoting some other church historian when he said that when it comes to the missions of the church, the Baptists walked, right? The Methodists came behind when the trails were paved with their wagons, and the Episcopalians waited for the trains. Said the same thing. So when we think about the church, with the early settlements had Baptist missions. The Methodist, here's the thing is about, we're looking at 1875, 1877, I think he said was the first real services in our area. We have to understand that when the first real services in our area happened, the Presbyterians were here, the Baptists were here, the Methodists were here, and the Catholics were here. We came late to the party, but guess what? We came. And so I was asking the question to John, I said, so why do you think the Episcopalians waited for the train? I said, because the train could have a bar. Yeah, a bar cart. You know, we like to do things in style, right? So actually the mission of the church for the Anglican, it's always been much more established missions, and we have not been of the missionary zeal that we have seen within, particularly the Baptists and the Methodists had this great missionary zeal in the 1850s and following. So what we're looking at here is that as the city began to develop and churches were already present in the South Valley here and in the Central Valley, the churches, the Episcopal Church was not yet formed in that way. But with Bishop Kipp beginning to get more and more people established in Los Angeles and San Francisco, began to have more people with missionary fervor to come into the Central Valley. But really, the missionary fervor of the Central Valley, particularly the Episcopal Church, is actually contingent upon something that I don't know if we have it up here. So maybe it comes on the next slide. But we're looking at the Reverend D.O. Kelly as a missionary. D.O. Kelly established churches all up and down the Central Valley. There's two particular churches that are still vital today. I mean, if you look at St. Paul's in Bakersfield, St. Paul's here, churches in Fresno, all these little places. Father Kelly was the one that really began to establish the work of the church in the South Valley here. And so in 1877, it's through his efforts that we begin to have services beginning, or at least gatherings happening in Visalia, but much more prominently in Tulare. Do you know why, even though Visalia is the county seat, why Tulare was the jumping off point early on? The trains.
Bar car.
The bar car, that's right. The bar, and the train specifically was that Visalia, as a community, the trains tried to come into make Visalia the hub because it was growing, but the city leaders couldn't make a deal with the train man. And of course, during that time, trains are king. And so they said, fine, you don't want to make this deal with us, Tulare is going to make the deal. So they made that deal, and Tulare becomes the center for commerce in the area. So there's non-church, history that's related to church history. So when we're looking at beginning of the services in Visalia, 1877, it's not for about another 10 years that we really get established here as a real mission with our own clergy here in Visalia. So Bishop Kipp in 1880 visited the valley, and he had, this is the first time in 1880 that we had confirmation services within the mission of St. John's in that area. And so, and then that's why at the same time, St. John's is organized, and it included the towns of Tulare, Visalia, Hanford, and Lemoore. And so until recently, of course, when I was here 15 years ago, we see that there's churches in every community. Christ Church in Lemoore, Church of the Savior in Hanford, Visalia had its own church, Woodlake has its own church, Lindsay, Porterville, Tulare. So we see all these communities being established with churches. Now, from 1880 to 1870, we see the church in Visalia beginning to grow. It's not even yet a mission, but it continues to grow with regular services. People coming in from there was a pastor out of St. John's, or one for like a circuit rider kind of thing. But it was in 1887 that the Visalia congregation was truly established as its own entity, and it was called St. Paul's Mission. That's why when we look at our history, we say, how old is St. Paul's this year? Anybody have a guess? Just minus 2023 from 1887. What's your answer?
There's no calculator.
No calculator. We used to be able to do this, right? Now we can't.
160. Yeah,
136. 136. Yeah, I had to use my calculator, which is why I know the answer.
I just thought the 150th anniversary was coming up.
No, it's not coming up for another 15 years. So 2037. Okay, and the good news is I'll be here for it. So that'll be a fantastic celebration. So now in 1887, that's when we're founded as a mission. And so look at this wonderful connection. When we're founded as a mission, where's the first place we begin to worship? At the Presbyterian Church. Isn't that a wonderful connection, isn't it? Mhm. Before then, where are the different places that we worship? People's homes? Possibly barns? Any connection? Yeah, so mostly people's homes or gathering places or little halls, or you can rent it for a service. So, but it didn't say anything in the history about where they were organizing and having this. So I'm assuming it was mostly in people's homes. So, but in 1892, the very first vicar, Father Waterman, John Waterman, came, and it was during his time that he was here that the first building gets established. Anybody remember where the first Episcopal church is? It's on North Street, where that was?
Taylor's Hot Dog.
Where Taylor's Hot Dogs is right now. So go on over there and say, can I have a St. Paul special? I have no idea what you're talking about. But yeah, so where our first church stood is now Taylor's Hot Dogs. And now really where the parking area right behind where the Presbyterian church is. So our first edifice now is a hot dog stand, or at least the hot dog stands on the same land.
So is the Presbyterian church in that location at the same time?
No, not at the same time. I don't know when they moved to that particular location, but you can see that churches, I mean, they could have had it. What's that?
I think they moved there in 21.
Oh, okay. So now looking at these particular dates here, so from 1892 we had for 4 years, basically, Father Waterman. For another 4 years, Father Lindsley. Another 2 years, Father Hart. So they came vicars on this mission. And so we didn't have somebody with longevity yet.
Oh, yeah.
But we did have, but in that time period, Visalia is just growing and growing and growing. And so you have a lot more people coming in more than just minus. Oh, let me, you know what? We're actually looking to the mission, but there's an important aspect of history that helped develop the the South Valley, and that was, I don't remember, Leanie, if it's in here, but it'll tell us that there was a law that was passed by the state of California about that affected cattle ranching and farming. And that law, I can't remember the name of it, but the law.
No fence law.
No fence laws. Okay, so but what they were doing is they would establish boundaries and perimeters. And the thing about it is that the no fence law says that the cattle ranchers would have to pay restitution to farmers if their cattle went into their land. And the problem was they could not farm adequately because the cattle ranchers didn't respect their private property. And so their animals would come in and eat up all the food on their land. Amy, being a rancher, spamming up north, understands the problematic nature when animals get loose on your property. And there's only one thing that you fight with your neighbor about more than cattle going on your property. And what is it? Water. Yeah. So Amy always family motto is whiskey for drinking, water for fighting. So now we're getting, so within the context, when that law goes into effect, there's a lot more repercussions on the cattlemen. And it's upheld in courts, and the officers, things come in and go, Father Rob, your 100 cattle went onto Linda's property and you're gonna owe her this much money. Like, no, I'm not. I'm like, yes, you are. And in fact, how much you owe her is equal to 15 of your cattle. So I'm just gonna take your 15 cattle, sell it, and I can't give her your money. Okay, so I mean, when the laws come into effect, property is respected more. So that helps form things a little bit better. So that's another big part of development of the South Valley, and communities, right, getting bigger because now they become agricultural hubs for getting these different agricultural things to different markets. So that's another thing. That's when the spur line is going in to Visalia and getting that also going out of here as well as Tulare. So in 1898, we have someone by the name of Father Westlake that comes. And here's another thing that we see. We move from Taylor's hot dog site downtown to Center Street and Encina Avenue. And we're going to be there for the next 40 years. Do you know where Taylor, for North Church Streets, right? And Encina, what's there now?
Bobby's Tacos?
Is that Encina?
Oh, no, I think that's the one for Gaza's son. Locust, that's Locust.
Encina runs north past the library.
The bus stop?
Presbyterian.
The transit?
Still right?
No.
Is that one of the one-way streets that turns into Danuba? Is that Encina? No,
No,
that's.
that's Court Street.
That's the historical home section. Once you're on the north side of the division.
Okay, yeah,
That's all Encina, Floral, that's all the historical homes. That's where Ben Maddox lives.
okay. I should have had our map so we could show you that. Location of that. Yeah,
One's downtown, so that's it.
yeah.
What price points are on? What?
Parallel to each other. Maybe they didn't at that time. I don't know. But it's still not far away from where, it's just right there in the downtown area.
Yeah.
And so that's where the church is established. Just think of the library area, where the library is now, right in there. So that's built in 1898, and in 1904, that's when we have the priest, Father Carroll here, they build a rectory. And then I wonder if that rectory is still one of the historical homes. I'm guessing it is still. And so, and then from 1911 through 1916, you have a series of priests. That's where you get like the 6 or 7 priests that come in quick succession. But it was in 1916 that actually we have a significant pastorate. Because actually from the time that the church is built all the way through 1916, we have what placed every church all over the place, you know, and I think this happens a lot when you have a succession of priests, because when you have a succession of priests, you can't build a church. Now you begin to have financial problems, debt, those kinds of things. And so by 1916, when we have Father Greiser come, he comes in and he begins to stabilize the finances and the mission of the church. And so during his pastorate, the church gets out of debt, begins to grow, and we see a beginning another boom for the life of St. Paul's mission. And so 1921, Father Gressler, under his pastorate, the church becomes a self-sufficient, sustaining parish. So in 1921 is when first time that St. Paul's mission is now known as St. Paul's Parish, or the official title of our church, which is the Rectors, Wardens, and Vestrymen of St. Paul's Church.
Is that because of the incorporation?
Incorporation, yes.
Which can-
And so that's what it's officially known as then. And I didn't research to find out when we were first incorporated, but I'm sure it wasn't in 1921. But we probably maintained the name. And so otherwise doing business as St. Paul's Parish Inc., which is our more well-known corporate title.
Oh, Colorado.
Yes.
Benzina and Center.
Mhm.
Just get it all those.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
church in Encina.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's separate.
Oh,
Church.
yeah, okay, I'm over here looking on that.
Look at it again. Update us, Joey.
Yeah, that's enough.
Okay. We have about 8 minutes, so left, but now we're getting actually to the end of the era here, 1921 to 1945. Now, remember that Father Gressler here really establishes the parish, gets it off a shaky ground, stabilizes it, gets rid of all the debt, they become a parish. And then during that time period, they saw many changes. Even as they're growing, they're still finding the challenges of finances that are going on. The challenges of building and maintaining a congregation. This 24-year period is just about, think about the stabilizing time within the history of Visalia. Some of you know, even though, I don't know, who has been in Visalia the longest? Dorothy, yes. It's an interesting thing about, can I share something with the congregation here? See this book right here? St. Paul's Episcopal Church, Visalia, California, written in 1962. On the very back page of this particular book, okay, there's a variety of names on here on the vestry. Mr. Robert Lard was the senior warden, Mr. James Davis was the treasurer, and Mr. James Neely was on the vestry in 1962. And so have you been a lifelong member of the church, Dorothy?
No.
Was James a lifelong member of the church? No, but he was on the vestry in 1962.
Yeah.
So you went.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I was the one that was baptized in this church,
Mhm.
and he had been, I don't know what was it. He was already a Christian,
Uh-huh.
but I wasn't.
Was he a member of the church before you? Did he
We both were-
came together? Oh, wonderful.
Okay.
Do you remember what year that was, or approximately what year?
It was after I had my first child.
Okay. It was before 1962. So 1962 is about 62 years, 61 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you and your husband were well established at this church, so that he could be on the vestry in 1962. Let's go back all the way to this time period between 1921 and 1945, specifically to the time period of the Roaring Twenties. Now, you see the little note up here? Women get the right to vote when? 1919. Let's be, I can give you a little bit of a political philosophy. They didn't get the right to vote in 1919. We finally recognized they should have had it all along. Can we say that? So 1919, it becomes ensconced as an amendment. I can't remember which amendment it was. Is it the 2019 amendment? No? Yeah. But as you can see within the traditional nature of the churches and things like that, even in the Episcopal Church, that for the next 10 years, there's not really much in our history that talks about how women were incorporated into the life of the church until you get to 1929. And in 1929, the vestry entertained a resolution that will not allow women to become members of the vestry. You can't believe it.
I'm surprised.
So they entertained a motion and it passed that women would not be allowed to be on the vestry. Now, this is Leanie's favorite part. Do you want to share this part? Because we both love it, but what happened next, Leanie?
Well, they went into the vestry meeting. Somebody, you better tell her, because I'm not sure.
Okay, so immediately after the vote takes place, it doesn't say who it was, but a gentleman comes into the meeting and the way that it's written, rakes them over the coals. Tells them what a terrible idea this is, that they should have never done it. This one individual, because it should have never done it. And basically, shame on you. So it said 10 minutes after women were denied access to vestry, another vote was taken and they were granted access to vestry, and subsequently 2 women were elected to the vestry in a span of 15 minutes.
The name of the gentleman.
It doesn't have it, and it just has what? A gentleman without a name. So in 1929, 2 women are that are elected to the vestry of St. Paul's. Now, why is this historically significant? I would say that many, even in the Episcopal Church, did not see their first women on the vestry, probably for at least another 20 to 40 years.
Church I grew up in still does not allow women on the vestry nor at the altar.
Mhm.
All the boys got, all the alcoholics got female,
Mhm.
like
They're still not, they're not connected, they're independent Anglican churches, that's why,
right,
right?
they were always that way.
Yeah, but wanting to maintain that, there was a time in which they had to become independent or they wouldn't be allowed to do that. So St. Paul's has its first women in leadership on the vestry in 1929. So that's a good one. So if you're a docent giving a tour, you can say that St. Paul's, you can tell the story. I mean, tell the story about that little bit. So so now we jump from 1929 to 1945 because we get the Dust Bowl area, which I would love to have more history, to find more history about the church's mission during the Dust Bowl and what it looks like.
All of the different passages in the next slide. I will
Yeah.
place that.
And then there's a couple more slides on pictures of churches that we're going to have too.
Oh yeah, Bob, it's Bank of America, Bank of America.
Where the Bank of America building is.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know that.
No, when
So-
you say Dust Bowl, you mean we had people coming from the Midwest?
All throughout.
Ditch bank Okies, all.
That's probably by selling a birthday, yeah.
That's when it was established to serve that. I'll tell you this, is that my grandfather, Robert Gillespie, was the youngest of 13 kids. The only one of the children in his family that was born in California. The rest of them were born where? Oklahoma. That's where they're from. So 1/4 of me is from good Okie stock, right? So, which is pretty obvious, I mean. So this is just, this is the church on the center in Encina, okay?
Taylor says no.
This is the list of all the pastors that are during that time period, okay? Here's another,
1 year.
this is actually a artist rendering that you'll find in this book and right here of the very first church edifice, right here. Okay, this is the one at where Taylor's Hot Dogs are now. The other one you saw was where the Bank of America building is now, and that one was actually moved from that location to North Hall Street until in 1949 under Victor Rivera, they built the red brick building.
Yep.
So historical markers, let's just go back to finish this up. Here's the historical markers. Gold found in the Kern River in 1855. 1876, missionaries arrive in Visalia, Episcopal missionaries. D.O. Kelly serves the area. 1879, Visalia becomes part of St. John's Mission in 1880. 1887, the Reverend Lindsley begins services. St. Paul's is established as its own mission. 1894, the church building is erected over at Taylor's Hot Dogs. St. Paul's becomes a parish. 1921. Then we're going all the way. 1949, St. Paul's 1949, Hall Street building is dedicated. 1966, St. Paul's School opens. 2018, we're nomads. 2020, St. Paul's School becomes the temporary home as construction begins on the new church campus on Hurley and Marcy.
Yeah.
We're refugees.
Refugees, or as we might actually say, for biblical exodus. All right. So next year, it's from Rivera. We're going to start with the beginning with Victor Rivera all the way to Father James. Now, we're going to have about 40 years in this time period, but the history that we have beginning in 1962 and onward, we don't have as much detail. In a sense, we do have it. So we're going to be working on some of that this week. But we're going to see just big things begin to happen. You're going to see like Visalia, all like big things that are still existing in this town that started during that time, with St. Paul's being a part of those kinds of missions. You know, Visalia senior housing.
Yep.
And then we're just going to see, because there's some significant things that we have been a significant part of here, whether we just did ministry-wise, like the Bethlehem Center, or you didn't know the Samaritan Center was started by Christian groups, including St. Paul's. What about Turning Point? Was that established as well? So
We're at 53 years,
yeah,
and St. Paul's, Ruth Mary Green was one of the 4 people that started Turning Point.
could I find the history of Turning Point on a website, or?
Yeah, you probably could.
Yeah, I'll go there, and if I need more information, I might reach out to.
Yeah.
Well, we are at 10 o'clock. I want to thank you all for being here today and taking that first 100 years of our history. Very, water from a fire, I was drinking from it. But I think we got all the history that we have, at least. So this will be on our app and be available as a PowerPoint that runs just this, and it'll have some music, and it'll have a little bit of commentary with it as well this week. So we'll be having that available. So not only are we going to have the class, but we're going to have that available for any of our members to walk through in 5 minutes. And then the recording of the class will go up on our app as well, so anybody can go through the 45 minutes of the class. So each week, those are the kind of things that we're trying to put together. A brief summary, a video, and then come to the class.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Oh,